Hello everyone. After centuries of religious dominance and feudal life, Europe awakened to a new age of curiosity, reason, and beauty. Welcome to the Renaissance, a vibrant era of rediscovery and transformation. It's the age that witnessed a rebirth of learning, art, and the human spirit. In this lesson, I'll talk about the Renaissance and its time frame. I'll explain the meaning of the term Renaissance. I'll mention some of the major incidents that happened during the Renaissance, and we'll talk about the key characteristics of this period. I'll mention the key authors and their literary works. We'll see together the language and the literary devices used during this period. And we'll have a quick view of art during the Renaissance, and we'll talk about its impact and importance as a literary period. And at the end, we'll have a kind of comparison between Renaissance and the classical literature. Let's start with the question, what does Renaissance mean? This word comes from French and it means rebirth. It refers to the revival of interest in classical Greek and Roman art, literature, science, and philosophy. The Renaissance began actually in Italy in the 14th century, but its influence reached England by the late 15th century, where it dramatically transformed English literature, theater, and even thought. The key points that I would like to repeat, it's a French word which means rebirth. It calls for the revival of Greek and Roman ideals. It emphasizes on reason, art, science, and the individual. And it emerged first in Italy, reached England later in the 15th century. The historical background, as I mentioned earlier, the Renaissance started in Italy in the 14th century and then it started to spread in the other parts of Europe, including England. It's considered as the shift from medieval to humanist thinking. And of course, it witnessed many important events like the fall of Constantinople in 1453, and it witnessed the rediscovery of classical texts by Plato and Aristotle. And we can see advancements in science, philosophy, and arts. It includes many sub-periods like the Elizabethan era, which is considered the most stable and the one that witnessed cultural flourishing, and Shakespeare, for example, and many other important events. Let's start with the key characteristics of the Renaissance. We see an elegant, refined, rhetorical style, and we are introduced to new themes in the Renaissance like human beauty, reason, virtue, love, the divine order, power, and individualism. We see also different forms and genres like lyric poetry, blank verse, essays, sonnets, and the Renaissance drama. Here are some of the most influential voices of the Renaissance in England. Of course, William Shakespeare, and he's the most famous playwright in English literature, like you remember Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and many other famous plays. He's considered as a master of human psychology, and he's famous for inventing words in English. And we have Sir Thomas More, Edmund Spenser, Christopher Marlowe with his famous Dr. Faustus, and Ben Jonson, and many other authors that became really famous, and they marked the era or the period of the Renaissance. Language and literary devices. Writers in the Renaissance played with the structure, sound, and meaning in brilliant new ways. We see the use of blank verse, rhetorical questions, allegory, and satire. They used many literary devices such as metaphors, similes, and we see wordplay like puns and other types of wordplay. For visuals and artwork, of course, the Renaissance is maybe the most famous period as far as artwork is concerned. So it was not only literary, but it was visual and architectural as well. We witness in this period classical columns, arcs, domes, and we are introduced to famous paintings by Leonardo da Vinci, for example, The Last Supper, and many other famous pieces of art. The Renaissance is one of the most important literary periods, and it has a lasting impact. It reshaped English literature forever, as it celebrated the power of human thought and creativity and introduced us to modern drama and sonnet tradition, as Shakespeare did, and it continued to influence modern education and culture. Now, what's not in the Renaissance period? Of course, these sentences that I wrote just to clear some of the common mistakes or confusions related to the Renaissance. Of course, medieval morality plays like Everyman and other plays are from previous pages from the medieval period, as we mentioned in the last video. And romantic poets like Wordsworth, Shelley, and S.T. Coleridge, they are not from the Renaissance. They come later in the Romantic period. And Renaissance literature is not ancient Greek or Roman. It's inspired by them, by the classical literature, but they are written in modern English. It's not the Enlightenment, it comes after that with different values and styles. So the Enlightenment is something different. We'll see it later in the new classical age. This leads us to this part of the lesson, as some confuse Renaissance literature with the classical literature. As you remember, we said the Renaissance calls for the revival of classical literature and classical art, but it's not the same. So classical refers to ancient Greek and Roman works, as you remember. Meanwhile, Renaissance writers were inspired by the classics of the Greek and Roman, but they are not the same. They are written in English. Here we have like a quick comparison. Time period, classical literature, as I mentioned in the first video of this series. It started circa 1200 BCE till 455 CE. Meanwhile, the Renaissance started circa 1485 till 1660. The classical literature, as you remember in the first video I made, it's ancient Greece and Rome. It's in Greek and Latin. Meanwhile, Renaissance literature is in English, and it's in Europe, in Italy, and then in other parts of Europe. The form and style, of course, you remember classical literature is epic, and it contains tragedies and other types that I talked about in one of the videos. And in the Renaissance, we are introduced to Shakespeare plays, Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, and many other great playwrights and authors. And we see new themes in Renaissance literature like humanism, love, reason, and individualism. And of course, this is very simple. The notable authors of the classical literature are Greek or Roman. Meanwhile, the Renaissance literature or the English Renaissance literature include Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and other great authors. So, the Renaissance was considered the golden age of human expression and English literature as well, for some scholars at least. Later in the next video, I'll talk about the Restoration and the Enlightenment period, or the New Classical period. Stay tuned. I hope that this was useful. See you later.